Good morning. We've had two substantive talks this morning, a lot of information. I've certainly been stimulated. I'm walking away with key words like abundance and the phrase soft power as well, and a lot of meat to chew over, to digest, and perhaps even regurgitate and redigest later. You can put your pens down now if you like, because I'm the cup of tea at the end of the morning. We're going to be woken up in a few moments' time by the taiko drummers that are coming, and they will make this room alive. But I want to just speak for a few moments from a personal perspective on the conference theme of conflict, and particularly look at the synergy that can arise out of times of crisis, and very much share something of my personal experience over the years. And if there was a word I leave with you today to add to the lexicon we have already developed, it's simply the word people. People matter. People are the ones who make development sustainable, for example. People matter. But oftentimes we fight, and I'm largely in the nonprofit sector. I've dabbled my toes in the for-profit sector. I've waved my baby finger in the academic world as well. But I kind of started off my adult life as the guy on the left. Now that's not really me. He's of course much better looking than I ever was. But I was kind of, my DNA was flower power. I was a late blooming hippie. My hair wasn't quite that long, nor was it curly. But me and my generation, the thing that we wanted to do most of all was to tick the establishment off. People in business and people in power. And we were wanting to make people like that guy in the suit angry. A remarkable thing has happened over the last generation, is that the gap that existed between the for-profit and non-profit has narrowed, and now there's a real synergy between the for-profit and non-profit. Even people like Eunice entering into the arena of microcredit and leading the way for the rest of us to do the same shows that we eventually, us guys with the peace finger and flower power and make love and not war, we eventually embrace capitalism to some measure. And a synergy has developed. So just that's a matter of introduction. Let me just tell you a quick story, which I think is true. I'm not entirely certain. It's a story of a Swedish couple who immigrated to California. This Swedish couple loved mushrooms, and they discovered a wild mushroom patch. And they decided, as a self-organized housewarming, they would have a mushroom feast for all of their new neighbors. And so they invited a dozen other families over to their house that night for this mushroom festival. And they had all kinds of mushroom dishes, I suppose, quiche and pizza and probably even mushroom milkshakes. They were that mad about mushrooms. And there was enough mushrooms, there was even enough for the cat to eat. And so they heaped up the cat bowl full of mushrooms as well. And later in the evening, the hostess goes back to the kitchen to replenish the platters full of various mushroom dishes when they noticed the cat's dish was empty. So she reached down to give the cat more mushrooms, and then to her horror, there was the cat looking very sick on the kitchen floor, writhing in pain. She phoned the hospital, quickly deducing that there was a connection, and because the cat's body was smaller than human bodies, the reaction came sooner, so she told emergency, and the emergency people said, get your guests into the hospital immediately. So they all ended up there. Ambulances came and got them. They were told not to drive. They arrived at the hospital about midnight, where for the next 3 hours they all have their stomachs pumped. 3 o'clock in the morning, they all go back to their host and hostess's home to gather their belongings before going back to their respective homes in the neighborhood, when somebody has the compassionate thought to check to see how the cat is doing. So they all go into the kitchen, expecting to see the cat dead on the kitchen floor. Quite the opposite. The cat was not only alive, but 7 kittens were by her side, which partly proves the point that things are not always what they appear to be, but it also illustrates again that in the darkest of moments, we can actually see something different, something unexpected come to light. That's my dog. few years ago, I was involved in work in Bosnia, the Balkans generally, in Bosnia particularly, during the horrific wars in the early 90s, and particularly focused on the city of Mostar, and wrote a book about an attempt of a young couple trying to keep a school open in the city of Mostar. Does anybody know the name of that bridge? The Starry Most. Probably some of you have been to see it. And when I was in Bosnia, I took away many things, including lifelong friendships, which I still have today. But there are two important things that I've thought about a lot since then. One was the concept of bridges. This is now the new Starry Most in Bosnia, where they love to dive off into the Neretva River. This is an artist's portrait of after the Starry Most was blown to pieces 20 years ago last November. And I remember going to Mostar, both before the bridge was blown up and being in Mostar after the bridge was blown up. Grown military men on both sides wept the day the bridge was destroyed. 500 years of connecting was lost. And in the research for our book, I came across this book by a Nobel winner for literature. And I'm sorry, I'm very bad with names and languages, but of Ivo Andrić, Bridge on the Drina. And in his book, The Bridge on the Drina, a Muslim myth is shared of how Bosnia was formed. Bosnia is a very mountainous country with deep ravines and gorges. And so the myth goes that God had created a splendidly smooth, fertile land. And that angered the devil. As the devil came with his fingernails and gouged out the land to separate peoples. And when Allah saw this, he had compassion, and he sent angels to spread their wings over the divides so that people could connect once again. And this is the DNA in Bosnians of all ethnic sides of how they view bridges. And that's why men wept. And I guess as a young man, or younger at least, I decided we need to be bridge builders. And one of the things I like about IAFOR and its multidisciplinary approach is we come to build bridges into other faculties, other disciplines, and other cultures. The other thing I took away is that people matter. All of the people on these slides happen to be friends of mine in different countries. People who have found their way out of self-reliance in a way, to self-reliance, out of extreme poverty, in a way that is sustainable for them. But when I was in Bosnia, and I'll come to this photo in a moment, the other thing I took away was, as we were hearing reports of mass rape, ethnic cleansing, these terrible, evil divides that were taking place and being created across that beautiful country, I asked a UN soldier, how do you cope? I was searching for some advice. And he said, the only way you can cope is by turning the volume down on your emotions. And that seemed to make sense. It was a couple years later that I was studying a particular paper by a management consultant in the States called Willard Waller. Has anybody ever heard of Willard Waller? He's got quite unusual parents because they're actually from Walla Walla, Washington, and to have named their son that was quite surprising. But Willard Waller wrote a paper entitled The Principle of Least Interest. And the principle of least interest is simply the notion that the party that has the least interest in a relationship has the most power. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If husband is deeply in love with wife, in whatever way that's expressed, in whatever culture, and wife is ambivalent, who has the greater power? It seems to be the person who cares the least. in negotiating, in business. Whoever wants that outcome least has the greater leverage and power. But yet there is something fundamentally wrong and inhuman about that approach. For if you look at the heroes throughout history who have made the biggest difference, they are people who have cared. Look at the heroes of the 20th century, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, a little-known character now in the world, Kagawa-san, not too far from here, who was as famous in the first half of the last century worldwide as Mother Teresa was in the second, because he lived among the poor of Kobe and eventually became an advisor to the government. Humans admire people who care. Another reason I like IAFOR is I find people come who are passionate about their subjects. They can take the most obscure and arcane of themes and somehow conveyed in a way where you sit on the edge of your seat listening because they care. And there is passion in this room. So I guess my message to us all today is, whether it's our field of study, whether it's our relationships, whether it's the communities that we live in, we can accomplish so much more if we care. So let me leave you with this story. Hope is not an emergency aid organization, but where we are working and a disaster happens, we of course are involved. So I was in Leyte province just hours after Yolanda came through. It was horrific, otherwise known in the world as the Haiyan typhoon. And these are just some of the pictures shot in Leyte just hours afterwards as we were trying to plow roads out back to Tacloban Airport from down the coast. Coconut farming is an important activity in Leyte. You can see the coconut trees were decapitated. The scenes here very familiar to the tsunami scenes in northern and eastern Japan. 1,000 new graves in this churchyard just days after the Yolanda blew through. But in closing, I'd like to tell you the story of these two people. Mary Grace from Leyte and Mohammed from Montreal. They met online. I don't know what the forum was and what the agency was used, but they met and kind of fell in love online. It was more than just chatting back and forth. They'd have Skype conferences between the two families. They had never met each other, and Mohammed was planning on going May, just last month, to go and visit Mary Grace and ask Mary Grace to marry him. Then news of the typhoon, days in advance. We knew it was heading. Mohammed Skyped Mary Grace and said, "Are you going to be okay?" "Yes, I will be okay." But when he began to see the scenes on TV, he sold his truck in Montreal for $800 to help buy his air ticket to go to the Philippines and find out for himself, because communications were down. She wasn't okay. She was badly injured. Family members lost their lives. I arrived in the Philippines at the same time as him, and I know the difficulties of getting into the stricken areas. He found a way, to kind of quote the old song, "Love finds a way." He found his way over, and this is the picture of when they meet for the first time. And she's in a clinic in Omok. He's found her and finds out that her leg is probably going to have to be amputated because they didn't have the facilities there to treat her. But there was a clinic in Cebu City that did. But it would cost several $1,000s in this private clinic. He sold all of his shares and things he had back in Canada to finance. He found a way to get her off. Leyte to Cebu, he carried her in his arms and took her over to the clinic where she was treated. And they were eventually married. And one of the reports I read quoted her as saying this about Muhammad coming to simply because he cared. She said, "I have never felt special in my life, but he has made me special." It's the power of a person reaching out and not turning the volume down on the passion and emotion, but to care about what they do and care about what they do, how what they do affects and impacts people. Thank you very much.